Hi, I'm Meredith, and I'm the founder and director of 5 Years In, and I prepare young people for the future of work. And in doing so, I talk a lot about the fourth industrial revolution. And this is a system-wide change that we're all experiencing. In fact, the World Economic Forum calls the fourth industrial revolution a blurring of lines between physical, digital, and biological spheres. McKinsey and Company estimates that this change, the fourth industrial revolution that's happening right now, is happening 10 times faster and will have 3,000 times the impact as the first industrial revolution. And so basically, it's this broad application of computing power, algorithms, machine learning to all systems in our life, biological systems, energy systems, physical systems that we're living with. And the fourth industrial revolution has having major changes on the world of work. And so it's pretty fascinating what's happening. And I love this quote from an Atlantic article a few years ago about, the unpredictability of the changes and how they might impact the workplace. And I talk a lot about that with young people. And so we live in this era of exponential change, and yet we're pretty linear. We're linear beings in that we grow, we advance pretty linearly. Our days and our years go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We celebrate birthdays linearly. We don't grow 1, 2, 4, 16, 32. That's not how we age. We learn pretty linearly. Our life is pretty incremental in terms of change. We might have some big events happening, marriages, births, new jobs, etc. But most of those changes are actually pre-planned. And so we're linear in the way that we think about our career arcs and life in general. And yet at the same time, we live in a world of exponential change. And it's hard to think exponentially. So it's pretty easy to think about linear advances, right? So if you're going, 31 meter steps ahead, if you take 4 steps, you're 4 meters ahead. And if you take 30 steps, you're 30 meters ahead. It's really difficult to think exponentially. If you take 30 exponential steps and we start with 1 meter step, it's really hard to fathom what 30 exponential steps is. And in fact, it would take you 1 billion meters away with 30 exponential steps. And that's the equivalent of 26 times around the Earth. Again, very few people can really comprehend that, but that's the pace of exponential change. And the pace of exponential change is so important because this is the way that technology has been moving for the past half century or so. So Gordon Moore, one of the co-founders of Intel, postulated in his now infamous Moore's, or I should just say famous, Moore's law, that computing processing power would double every 2 years. And in fact, his prediction is pretty much held true. But the reality is that this processing power and this exponential change is no longer confined to the world of computing, as we have applied computing to systems and technologies that go well beyond what's in your PC or your laptop. In fact, and this is probably a very bold estimate for singularity at some point, but we do see, and we are going to see exponential change happening to artificial intelligence and machine learning. And the interesting thing about exponential change is that you don't see a difference, you don't see a difference, you don't see a difference on this kind of flat part of the J-curve until you reach this inflection point, and then people start to notice this change happening at a pretty rapid pace, and then all of a sudden the change is here because this nearly vertical part of exponential or J-curves. And so this is the type of change that we're going to be experiencing. A nothing, nothing, nothing inflection, and then it's here all of a sudden. And that's really part of the fourth industrial revolution that we have to prepare for. I love Mary Meeker's Internet Trends Report, and particularly I found that her technological disruption and pace of change slides were super interesting, right? So it took over 75 years for 25% of Americans to have a dishwasher. It took over 60 years for over 25% of Americans to have air conditioning. And it took about 5 years for over 25% of Americans to have mobile phones and the internet. We see this pace of change in a different way with these technology proliferation curves, right? They tended to be much more horizontal in years past. It took a while for people to adapt major new infrastructural changes and new technologies, electricity, refrigeration, that kind of thing. Lately, though, with the fourth industrial revolution, we see nearly vertical adoption of new technologies, nearly instantaneous adoption. And these are nearly vertical curves is what I should say. And this is happening at paces that we've never seen before. And this again, examples of exponential change that we're living in, accelerated change. In Mary Meeker's Trends report, she also talks about the data that's exponentially increasing because of our connection to computing devices and the capture of data based on all of the moves that we're making on mobile phones and on our computers, and because of all the sensing technologies. And when I talk to young people about the future of work, data scientist comes up again and again as the hottest job in America, and we can just look at a graph like this to see why. Companies are super eager to take advantage of all this data to think about how they might improve their products and make more money. We also see exponential or J curves in the Internet of Things, connected devices, which are just connected. Connected devices can be in our home, in our workplace, in our, outside. It can be used by everyone from police departments in cities to improve the roads that we're driving on, etc. So that it's really exciting, and there's lots of opportunity there because of the J curve there. We also see the sensing technologies that are instrumental for autonomous vehicles increasing at an exponential pace. It's not just, again, computing or technologies, but it's the energy that we're using that's going to be changing exponentially. The capacity of photovoltaic cells has increased exponentially over the past few years and will in the future. And it's also the world of work that's changing exponentially. It's interesting that freelance workers are actually increasing, or opportunities for freelance workers are increasing exponentially compared to the rather linear growth of traditional workers. So Diane Mulcahy of Babson College, she's a professor in their MBA program. She encourages her MBA students to go out and get a gig because it's much easier to find a contract position. Prove yourself, get experience, gain skills, and then you'll be much more attractive on the traditional job market. Again, this industrial revolution is revolutionizing everything that we do, not just industry, not just technology. So we know that exponential change is happening, and we know that people are really not so good at exponential change. And so how do you thrive in this world? Well, one, I would say do something that's really hard, which is to embrace the unknown. It used to be that a common interview question would be, what do you see yourself doing in 5 years? And you would say, I would expect myself to have this higher position of power and responsibility, and I'd hope that I'd make more money. But in an era of exponential change, you don't just go from A to B to C, you go to A to G or A to Y, and that's how change happens. And so I would highly encourage you to respond, I don't know, to that question, because the world is changing so quickly and you want to change that quickly as well, and it's almost impossible to predict where you're going to be. This slide talks about the changes that are even happening at the largest companies in America, so the Fortune 500 index of the 500 largest companies. It's predicted that 50% of the companies on this list will be gone or replaced in the next 10 years. So size is no predictor of stability or longevity anymore. In fact, there may be a slight edge for smaller, more nimble companies in the future when we're talking about exponential change. To thrive in this exponential world, you have to continue learning. Upwork releases a quarterly skills index of the most in-demand, highest paid skills. Almost none of these skills are taught in high school. Almost none of these skills are taught in college, and almost none of them are college majors. And so what that means is that the people that will thrive in a world of exponential change are committed to figuring things out on their own, learning about what's happening in the world and learning from trends, and teaching themselves these skills to be marketable in the future. It's also really important to be global in this era. If you want to have an exponential impact, you have to leverage the power of these social media platforms and communications platforms to get your ideas out. You can't just send an email or post on your blog. You have to post where people are. You have to use hashtags, and you have to know how to connect. I would also encourage you to open source the challenges you're working on so that you can have exponential solutions to the problems that you're working on. I also encourage everyone to be fully engaged with work that really plays to their strengths. And in this, I would refer you to a lot of new research and a new book about this concept from Japanese called ikigai, which is reason for being. You are going to have you're going to make an exponential impact and be exponentially better than someone else if you can find kind of your own sweet spot, which is this connection between what you love doing, what you're really good at, what you're passionate about, and what you can get paid for. And so if you can find this reason for being and devote yourself to it, that's what you should be doing. You don't have to be a computer programmer or a data scientist. And in fact, you shouldn't be if that's not what you're good at and that's not what you're passionate about. Do what you're best at and you will be exponentially better than others. Look for and engage in J-curves. So the J-curves that we talked about earlier with the Internet of Things, autonomous vehicles, new energy systems, certainly engage in those J-curves, but also engage in the J-curves that were going to lead to the most returns for you personally. I teach personal finance and I encourage young people to start retirement accounts early because what we see are compound interest is a J-curve. The J-curve is also the common revenue model for startups. Engage in a startup. Participate in a startup. Start a startup because this is where we see the most revenue as well. So find opportunities to engage in J-curves. And also find and engage in processes that lead to exponential impact. Don't just survey people, but engage in strategic processes like design thinking, like iterative prototyping with lean startup methodology or agile methodologies that will allow you to find solutions that will solve problems much more efficiently in ways that people want and will pay for much more quickly. Again, find and use and practice these processes. Take on moonshots. This is an era of exponential change where incremental change isn't going to cut it. Try to solve the biggest problems that you can think of. And I think Joe Biden's Cancer Moonshot Initiative and Elon Musk and his initiatives, whether it be the Hyperloop or Tesla or SpaceX, those initiatives are moonshot initiatives where he's trying to solve major problems in really audacious, bold ways. And at the same time that you're taking on these moonshots, you can't be discouraged if change doesn't happen tomorrow because, in fact, that's not how exponential change works. So if you think about this lily pad parable, so think about a pond that fills up exponentially with lily pads, and it fills up exponentially in 30 days. The question in the parable is on what day is the pond half full? Few people would say that the pond is half full on day 29, but in fact it takes until day 29 to be half full, but then it completely fills by day 30. So again, remember with exponential change, there's an inflection point where everything changes and it seems like change happens all at once. I would encourage you to think like a futurist, and one of the most kind of exciting models to use is the futures cone, where you can think about, well, tomorrow there's not going to be a lot of opportunities for something that's going to be different in the future, let's say in the world of work. But in 50 years from now, there can be so many different possibilities in the world of work. To find those possibilities that you see in the future and then work backwards from there. And there are plenty other futurist tools out there, horizon scanning, looking for earlier weak signals just through kind of news searches, etc., and doing some research. I would encourage you to be a futurist and learn from the future just like you can learn from the past. I would also encourage generative question asking. There are better questions than why and how, and some of these better questions for exponential thinking are how might we or what if? Those are bold questions that will lead you to interesting solutions that maybe have never been thought of before. And finally, I'll end with a quote from Gretchen Rubin of the Happiness Project. I love this quote just personally. The days are long, but the years are short, because it rings so true. But also when we think about exponential change, it's really hard to think far into the future. It's hard for us to think about what's for dinner 3 days from now. But because change is happening so rapidly and because there's so many exciting problems to solve, I would encourage you to think exponentially and think into the future, because we don't want to just be victims of the future. We don't want the future to just happen to us. In fact, I want us to be a part of creating the future, and I want us to be part of the exponential change that's happening, because it's all really exciting, and there's this system level change that's happening, and let's be part of this exponential change together. All right, so I hope this talk gave you some insight in what it might take to be an exponential person. I'd love to hear your feedback and hear about how you're going to apply some of this to your lives in the future. Thanks so much. Take care.